Hi everyone, and welcome to today's Passport New Release Vendor Training, Subcontractor Approval Updates and Payment. The Mayor's Office of Contract Services, also known as MOCS, leads procurement for New York City. We serve as an oversight and service agency dedicated to making it easier to do business with the city. One of the ways we do that is with our digital procurement system called Passport. Today, we'll begin with an overview of today's topic, the subcontractor module in Passport. We'll show you how to submit requests to your agency for subcontractor approval and updates. Then we'll show you how subcontractor payments are recorded and confirmed in Passport. After that, we'll share some helpful resources. Please note that the demonstrations shown today were done in a testing environment, so things might look a little different or move a little more slowly than you're used to in the real Passport. Let's begin with an overview of subcontracting in Passport. You might be asking yourself, what is that? What is that? What is subcontracting? Vendors contracting with the city may, with agency approval, contract out some of their work to another vendor. That vendor is known as a subcontractor. So why is this important? Subcontracting has been part of city procurement for a long time. And with the newer capabilities in Passport, we can streamline the flow of information, increase transparency for both agencies and vendors, and improve record keeping and simplify the process so that it doesn't rely on so many offline actions. So before we move on, let's review some subcontracting terminology. Sorry about that. In the subcontracting world, vendors with the New York City contract are called prime vendors. Vendors who contract with a prime vendor are called subcontractor vendors or subcontractors. Tier 1 subcontractors have a contract directly with the prime vendor. Tier 2 subcontractors have a contract with the prime vendor's Tier 1 subcontractor. The recent Passport update allows prime vendors to request approval for and manage their Tier 1 and Tier 2 subcontractors. If your organization works with New York City as both a prime vendor and as a subcontractor, you do not need separate Passport accounts. It used to be that subcontracting in New York City required the use of several systems. You had the Payee Information Portal, or PIP, the Financial Management System, or FMS, Passport, and additional paper and offline tasks. Passport is now able to absorb PIP's subcontractor management functionality and facilitate the subcontractor management process. So what does that mean for subcontracts that were in PIP? Subcontracts on registered contracts within PIP were migrated to Passport before the new release went live. Those subcontracts were transferred to Passport with their corresponding statuses, such as pending approval, approved, and canceled. Pending subcontract tasks in PIP will then be available in Passport. Going forward, subcontractors will need to set up Passport accounts to maintain their progress because all subcontract management tasks are now conducted in Passport. So here are some features of the subcontractor module. Subcontractor approval is where prime vendors submit information about their Tier 1 and Tier 2 subcontractors for agency approval. Subcontractor modification is how prime vendors request updates to approved subcontractors. Payment validation allows prime vendors to record their payments to Tier 1 subcontractors and Tier 1 subcontractors to confirm their payment from primes. And finally, MWBE utilization tracking. This allows agencies and their vendors to track progress toward MWBE participation goals. MWBE stands for Minority or Women-Owned Business Enterprise. Today's training will cover the first three topics. To utilize the features within Passport's subcontractor module, prime vendors, Tier 1 subcontractors, and Tier 2 subcontractors should check that they have a PIP account, have a Passport account, are filed in Passport, and are assigned the correct user role. We'll talk about those next. User roles in the subcontractor module are the same for primes and subcontractors, but the privileges will differ. Vendor admin has the most privileges and is the only role that can manage contacts and assign roles to other contacts. Vendor procurement roles are relevant for subcontractor approval and modification requests. Vendor financial roles are relevant for payment validation. Let's begin with subcontractor approval. The subcontractor approval begins with the prime vendor submitting subcontractor information. Next, they initiate subcontractor approval and enter additional information and supporting documentation. Then they submit their request to the contracting agency. The agency will review the subcontractor information and grant a decision. The subcontractor approval request will change status after the prime vendor submits it to the agency. Right. So here are the statuses that you may see with your subcontractor information. If this contract is not registered and the agency grants pre-approval, the status will read pending contract registration. Agencies shall notify the prime vendor within 30 days whether preliminary approval has been granted for a subcontractor. When the agency grants the subcontractor preliminary approval, the status will change to pending final approval. Once the contract is registered and the agency has fully approved the subcontractor, the status will change to approved. A notification email will be sent to the prime vendor and to the subcontractor. A status of denied means that the subcontractor is not approved. A notification email will be sent immediately to the prime vendor and the subcontractor. Now, if an agency has revoked a previously approved subcontractor, the status will change to revoked, and a notification email will be sent to both the prime vendor and the subcontractor. Subcontractor information may be added when you prepare your RFX response like a proposal or bid, or in the contract. During the RFX response preparation, you have three options. You may add a subcontractor with the Passport account, identify a subcontractor not in Passport, or state that a subcontractor is not yet identified. Let's see how this works in the RFX response.
During your proposal creation, you would go to the Subcontractors and Joint Ventures tab. Then you would click in the subcontractor information section, you'll click the Add Subcontractor button. Then the next thing you need to do is complete subcontract information. So you're going to enter in the value, the dollar amount, the purpose, a start date, an estimated end date, and then you'll enter in vendor information. If you do not know your vendor that you will use for subcontracting, then you can click this button here. If you do know the vendor and you know that they do not yet have a passport account, then you would still click the button and then manually enter in the information in these fields. On the other hand, if you know your vendor and you know that they have a passport account, you can select them from this drop down. When you're done with everything, you'll hit save and then close.
When submitting subcontractor information within the contract, you may only add subcontractors that have a passport account. Subcontractor dates must be within contract dates. The system will not block you from entering a subcontract start date in the past as long as it is within the contract start and end dates. Subcontractors identified in the RFX response will be copied over to the associated contract. If the subcontractor is marked as not yet identified in the RFX response, it will be copied over to the contract with a blank vendor name. Once subcontractors from the RFX response are sent over to the contract, their information cannot be changed. However, they can be deleted and a new subcontractor can be added. Launching subcontractor approval is done within the contract. To locate the contract, click Contract in the top navigation menu, then select Manage My Contracts from the drop-down. On the Manage My Contracts page, enter the contract EPIN in the keywords fields or use other search filters and then click Search. The search results will appear in a table below the search filters. To view the contract, click the pencil icon to the left of the contract EPIN. When the contract is opened, go to the Subcontractors tab. If you do not see the Subcontractors tab or do not see the Add Subcontractor button or the Subcontractor tab fields are not editable, please check that you've been assigned the correct user roles and have been added to the setup team with your user role or profile added. Again, if you don't see the Subcontractors tab or the Add Subcontractor button, you have to do a couple of checks. Check that you are listed as a contact and that you have been assigned one or more of the relevant user roles, right? That's vendor admin, vendor financials, or vendor procurement. You must also have been added to the setup team with the correct user role assigned, and that's contract by contract basis. Right? If you don't have any of these roles and you think you should, go to your organization's vendor admin to make sure that you are assigned the correct user role for both your organization and on the setup team for this contract. Then get in touch with your contracting agency to make sure that everything is okay on their end. And finally, contact the MOCS service desk. We'll show you how at the end of this webinar. So if you identified the subcontractor during the RFX phase, starting the subcontractor approval process in the contract will follow three scenarios. Scenario 1, you identified the subcontractor. Scenario 2, you selected a vendor not yet identified. And scenario 3, you did not add a subcontractor. We'll talk about each of these next. If you previously identified a subcontractor in the RFX response, click the pencil icon next to the subcontractor ID. The Manage Subcontractor window will appear. Enter information in all the required fields. They are marked with a red asterisk. Then, click the Save and Launch Subcontractor Approval button at the top of the screen. If you selected Vendor Not Yet Identified when entering subcontractor information in the RFX response, click the pencil icon next to the subcontractor ID. The Manage Subcontractor window will appear. Deselect the I do not know the vendor checkbox. The page will refresh and the Select Passport Vendor field will be visible. Select the subcontractor from the dropdown. After you've entered information in all the required fields, click the Save and Launch Subcontractor Approval button. And if your subcontractor was not added during the RFX phase, one can be added during the contract registration phase. Let's see how this works.
In the contract, subcontractor information can be added by going to the Subcontractors tab and then clicking the Add Subcontractor button. You'll enter subcontractor information such as the purpose, the requested subcontracting amount, the requested start date, and the requested end date. Then you'll have to answer, is the subcontractor directly under the prime vendor of the contract? In other words, is this a tier 1 subcontractor or a tier 2 subcontractor? So if they're tier 1, you'll say yes and there's nothing more to do. If they're tier 2, you say no. And then once you launch the approval, you'll have to identify who the tier 1 subcontractor is. But in this example, I'm going to select yes. Then in the vendor information section, you'll only have the option to select a passport vendor. And then when you're done, you're going to click Save and Launch Subcontractor Approval.
So that's how to add the subcontractor if you haven't added it before. After the Save and Launch Subcontractor Approval button is clicked, the page will refresh and new fields will become available. A non-blocking alert will appear in the Alerts section if the selected vendor is not filed in Passport or if they don't have a PIP account. The subcontractor may still be submitted for approval. However, they will not be final approved by the agency until their Passport account status becomes filed and the PIP account is created. Documentation required for subcontractor approval is at the discretion of the contracting agency. In other words, if you are uncertain which documents you should be uploading with your subcontractor approval request, please contact your agency. After you've completed all required fields, click Save, and then click Submit. When a subcontractor needs to be updated, the prime vendor must submit a modification request. Modifications can be used to update the purpose of the subcontract value, the start or end date, the subcontractor's New York City MWBE's confirmation and certification, and it can be used to add additional documentation. Please note that modification requests can only be submitted for subcontracts with the status of approved, pending final approval, or revoked. Next, I'll show you a simplified overview of the process. Within the contract, the prime vendor must select the relevant subcontract and enter a detailed reason for the modification. Next, they initiate the modification request and make updates to the subcontract. When they are done, they submit their request to the contracting agency. The agency will then review the modification request and grant a decision. The modification request status will change after the prime vendor submits it to the agency. Modification requests have one of three statuses after the prime vendor submits to the agency. There's pending approval. This shows when the agency is reviewing the request. Update approved. This is shown after the agency approves the request. Update denied. This is shown if the agency does not approve the submitted updates. We're going to close out this section with a demonstration of submitting a modification request.
We can see now that the vendor, the subcontractor that we submitted, number one landscaping core, we did this for 45,000. It's down here. It has been approved. Okay. So what we're going to do now is we're going to say, hey, we would like to change the end date for this subcontract so that it ends in November instead of October. In order to do that, we need to do a modification. So we're going to open this subcontractor approval up and we're going to click modify subcontract. Here we're going to enter the reason for the modification request, which is change the end date. And the information that you put here is going to be helpful for the agency to identify the modifications that were made in your request. Once you're done here, you're going to click Initiate Modification Request. All right, so the only change that we need to make right now is going to be the end date. So I'm going to change this to November 4th. I'm going to click Save. And if there were any documents to upload in support of this modification request, I would click Manage Documents, and then I would upload the documents either from my computer or from Passport Vault. I have no documents to upload right now, so I'm going to move on. Let's go to the Modification Log tab. Here you will see the original approved value for this subcontractor, and you'll notice that the end date was October 2nd. And here is the requested value for this modification, and the end date is November 4th. The new value area is not editable. This is an area that the agency will populate once they begin their modification approval process. So since that's it, now we're going to click Submit. Now that we are done, I'm going to click Close. And we can see our modification requests for this subcontractor by clicking on Modification Requests. As you can see, I have canceled several modification requests in doing the demo for this video. The latest one that we have done is pending approval.
With the new Passport release, vendors can now enter subcontractor payments directly in Passport, making it easier for subcontractors and the agency to confirm them. Payment validation helps to promote transparency and reduce confusion around subcontractor payments. Subcontractor payments are not processed in Passport. Instead, they are recorded in Passport after payment has been made outside of Passport. Here's an overview of how it works and the vendor user roles involved. The process begins when the prime vendor pays the subcontractor. This payment does not happen within Passport, so the prime vendor must record this payment in Passport. Users with the vendor admin, vendor financials level 1, vendor financials level 2, vendor procurement level 1, or vendor procurement level 2 roles can all complete this action. Next, the subcontractor confirms that payment. The subcontractor's vendor admin, vendor financials, and vendor procurement users can complete this step. After that, the contracting agency verifies the payment in Passport. When everything is confirmed and validated, the information is published on Checkbook NYC, the online transparency tool that provides up-to-date information about the city's finances. You can see how all this works for prime contractors in this demonstration video.
We are now going to record a subcontractor payment. I'm logged in as the prime vendor. I've already found my contract and I've navigated to the subcontractors tab. My first step is going to be to identify the subcontractor that I want to record a payment for. In this case, it's going to be this one, D-Yard International, and I'm going to click the pencil icon to open it up. Excellent. So now my Manage Subcontractor window is open and I am going to do a new task. And so as a prime vendor, the act of recording a payment to your subcontractor in Passport is called initiating payment validation. So I'm going to click on this Initiate Payment Validation button. I'm going to enter my payment amount, in this case $20, the payment date, in this case August 16th, and then I'm going to click Initiate Subcontractor Payment. Alright, so the next thing I'm going to do is I am going to do the subcontractor invoice date. So this is the day that the subcontractor submitted the invoice to the prime. So I'm going to say that they submitted it 1 week in advance on the 9th, and the amount was $20. The proof of payment, if I hover over this I, it tells me more. It's either a check or an EFT number to provide a record of the payment. I'm just going to enter that. And in this description box, let me open this up so you can see that wider, you're going to enter some details about the payment. In my case, I'm just going to put in some filler text. That's not real. Yep. Good enough. If, for instance, over here, you were using an invoice that the payment was coming from. So as the prime, you have a particular invoice for this contract, and maybe you were making a subcontractor payment in association with the invoice for this contract, you would select it from here. That is not required, and I am not going to do that now. I'm going to click Save. And the next thing I would do is if I had any documents to submit in support of this subcontractor payment recording, I would go to the Documents tab, click Manage Documents, and I would upload, maybe a copy of the subcontractor's invoice that they submitted, or I might upload a copy of the check that I wrote them or the EFT that I gave them, so on and so forth. Once I clicked Manage Documents, I can upload those things from my computer or from the Vault. I'm not going to do that at this time, so I'm going to go back to Payment Information and I am all done. And so now I'm ready to click Submit. Great, I have hit Submit and all of my data has been saved. I'm going to close out of here. And now what I can do is I can go to the subcontractor payments because I'm still in the managed subcontractor area for this particular subcontract. So I can go here and you could see that this is the most recent one that I've done. Excuse me, it's down here and it is pending subcontractor validation. Okay, pending subcontractor validation. So that means the next step is for D-Yard International to come into Passport and they will validate or confirm that I paid them.
So that's how um, subcontractor payment validation works from the prime point of view. Here's a simple overview of the process from the subcontractor side. First, the subcontractor must find the payment validation task. Then they review the information about the payment, such as the date, the amount, invoice information, and so on. After that, the subcontractor reviews any supporting documentation that the prime subcontractor may have included. Once those views are complete, the subcontractor will validate and confirm the information, or they can return it to the prime vendor for revisions. There are two ways to find the subcontractor validation task. Option number one is to go to the home page and look within the Open Workflow Tasks section. Once you've located the task, click the pencil icon. Option number two is to find the task on the Vendor Workflow Tasks page. To access this page, click Tasks from the top navigation menu. By default, tasks with an in-progress status are shown. Once you've found that task, click the pencil icon. Either way, you'll then be brought to the Payment Information tab of the Subcontractor Payment window, where you can review the information submitted by the prime. Note that the approval status in this example is currently pending subcontractor validation. The prime vendor name is listed along with the total subcontract amount. In this example, it's $727,095.34. The total amount paid to date for this subcontract is 0, indicating that no subcontractor payment has been recorded in Passport yet by the prime vendor. The amount remaining field shows the remaining balance for this subcontract. The subcontractor invoice date should be the date you submitted the invoice to the prime. In this case, it's July 1st, 2024. The subcontractor invoice amount is the dollar amount shown on that invoice. Let's try this again. This example shows $727,095.34. Payment date refers to the date you received payment from the prime. This example shows payment was made on August 8th, 2024. Amount should list the amount you were paid by the prime. In this example, we can see the amount listed here matches the invoice amount. Proof of payment field will contain either a check or an EFT, that's electronic funds transfer, number associated with the payment. The payment description field shows information about this payment, such as the work associated with it. In this case, the payment is for completed landscaping work. The submission date is the date that the prime submitted a record of their payment to you in Passport. In this case, it's August 8th. In the Documents tab, you can review documents submitted by the prime vendor. In this example, no documents were submitted by the prime. You can also submit documents as a subcontractor, such as your invoice or other supporting documents for the payment validation task. To upload documents, click the Manage Documents button, then choose whether to upload a document from your computer or from the Passport vault. When you're done uploading documents, click Save. If there are errors in the payment information or the documents that are submitted by the prime vendor, click the Return to Prime Vendor button. You'll then be prompted to submit a reason for the return. Write enough details here so that the prime vendor will easily be able to identify the changes that they need to make. When you're done, click the OK button. You'll know the action was successful because the approval status field will show returned. But if everything looks accurate in the payment information and the Documents tab, click the Validate button. A success message will appear, and the approval status field will display pending agency validation. And the subcontractor payment records table will be empty until the agency validates the payment. Once the agency has validated the payment, the approval status field will display validated. And the subcontractor payment records table will be populated with the validated payment. So let's talk resources. You can access our Learning Resources Library page by visiting nyc.gov/learnpassport. On that page, we recommend using the panel on the right to get to the topics that you're interested in. You will also be able to find some resources in Spanish. Most of the information about subcontracting will be found in the Respond to Contract Opportunities section. Remember to visit the Trainings tab on nyc.gov/learnpassport. There you'll have the opportunity to sign up for future trainings and see webinar recordings. Those of you new to Passport may want to watch the recordings for assigning user roles, completing the vendor enrollment package, and subcontractor approval and updates. If you still have questions or need help navigating Passport, check out our MOCS help page by visiting nyc.gov/MOCS help. You can review answers to frequently asked questions to address your Passport issues. If you need to submit an inquiry to the MOCS service desk, click the link at the bottom of the page. We host several free trainings and events to help organizations to do business with New York City. Visit mocsvendortraining.eventbrite.com to learn more and register for our upcoming events. Follow us to stay up to date on our events. Getting Started is our series of monthly webinars designed for new vendors who want to learn how to confidently navigate Passport and contract with New York City. MOCS in Your Neighborhood is our series of in-person trainings and networking opportunities for vendors across New York City. And finally, Passport Vendor Financials is our series of webinars that show vendors that are currently contracting with the city how to use Passport to get paid. All right. During registration, we asked if you had questions about this topic. Here are some of the questions you submitted and their answers. If we can add subcontractors without Passport account, does that mean that subcontractors don't need them? No, that's not what that means. Subcontractors will still need to complete vendor enrollment in Passport. Subcontractors that are new to Passport can attend a Passport Setup for Subcontractors webinar, which happens Thursdays at 11 a.m. I'm a Prime vendor and I'm unable to see the Add Subcontractor button. What should I do? Please make sure that you are listed as the organization's vendor admin, vendor financials level 1 or 2, or vendor's procurement level 1 or 2. Then make sure you are added to the setup team for this specific contract. If you aren't, contact your organization's vendor admin. If you're still having issues after these checks, contact your contracting agency or the MOCS service desk. So how long do subcontractor approvals typically take? Agencies must notify the prime vendor within 30 days whether preliminary approval has been granted. No subcontractor shall be permitted to perform work unless they are final approved by the agency. Are there minimum thresholds for subcontractor payment or reimbursement amounts? Please check your contracting agency's fiscal manual or contact your agency contact for guidance. Thank you for asking such great questions.
I hope everyone had a great day. Thank you for joining us.